like to thank the anonymous sponsor for this week's drasha. The drasha is sponsored anonymously in honor and in gratitude to all of our dedicated Gaboyim. If I may just echo the sentiment that we should be appreciative of our Gaboyim really every day of the year in our shul, but particularly in these times, whether it be making sure that everyone who's supposed to be in the minyan is at the minyan, whether it be making sure that there's someone who maybe is at the wrong minyan, making sure they understand they're at the wrong minyan, or in a nice way for tomorrow, making sure people are keeping the health protocols, figuring out what needs to be provided. Everything is complicated in these times with COVID, and we have really a wonderful, wonderful group of people who selflessly work so hard, really day in, day out. So many of them, day in, day out, just that the tefillos should be appropriate and that everyone is well and everyone is taken care of. And their effort should be a great merit for each and every one of them and all those close to them. And so thank you very much to the sponsor, and thank you very much to the Gaboyim. Yasher Kochachem. There's a really fascinating pasuk, a confusing pasuk, around the middle of the Parsha. Yosef has revealed himself to his brothers. The brothers have come home. They've told Yaakov that indeed Yosef is alive. They tell Yaakov that Yosef says that they should all move down to Egypt. The famine is going to be still a significant amount of time, and Yosef will take care of the entire family in Egypt. The Mefarshim explained that Yaakov is extremely ambivalent about this. It's worthwhile to note, if you look at Yaakov's father was not supposed to spend any time outside the land of Israel. In fact, not that many weeks ago that we studied the whole story of Avram assigning Eliezer to go find a spouse for his son Yitzchak. And part of the concept of that is that where Eliezer would go would be outside the land of Israel. And Yitzchak was not to leave the land of Israel. So Eliezer has to go on Yitzchak's behalf. Now, of course, Yaakov had left the land of Israel before, but he left the land of Israel because his life was in danger, because who knew what Esav was going to do to him. And he also left to find appropriate wife. So now he's settled down. Thank God he made it back. He made it back to the place that his family has established itself, this holy land that the family has established itself over generations now. It's time to let the roots go firmer into this land so that generations of the Jewish people should be connected to the land of Israel. The Mefarshim explain that Yaakov is extremely ambivalent about the concept of leaving Israel to go to Egypt. In fact, according to some of the Mefarshim, Yaakov's plan was just to go and say Shalom Aleichem to Yosef and then go back to Israel. And he brings offerings to God, and God reveals a message to Yaakov, and he tells him very clearly at the beginning of Perek Mem Vav, chapter 46, verse 3, Al tiro me'erdam Mitzrayma, don't be afraid of going down to Egypt. Ki l'goy gadol asimcha sham, I will make you a great nation there. Anochi ered imcha Mitzrayma, I will go down with you to Egypt. For anochi alcha gam alo, and I ultimately will bring you out of Egypt. And here's the phrase: V'Yosef yashis yado al einecha, and Yosef will place his hand on your eyes. What in the world does that mean? Yosef will place his hand on your eyes. Just the basic phrase is difficult to understand. The Mefarshim, the classical Mefarshim, say different things. One pshat that some of the Mefarshim explain is they suggest that Yosef will cover the eyes of Yaakov in the sense that Yaakov doesn't have to worry about anything. Yaakov doesn't have to worry about practical logistics. Yaakov doesn't have to worry about food for the table. Yosef will take care of all of these things. You'll just come down to Egypt and Yosef will sweat the details. That's one pshat that shows up at some of the Mefarshim. Another pshat that shows up in some of the Mefarshim is that actually, heaven forbid, when a person passes away, one of the first things that is done when a person passes is someone closes the person's eyes. So Yosef yashis yado al einecha. Yosef will place his hand on your eyes, meaning you had been frightened all this time that you had lost Yosef. You should know you'll go down to Egypt, and Yosef will be the one to bury you. You will leave this world with your family intact, including Yosef. That's an interesting pshat. But I want to share with you, I saw this year an interesting idea from the Meshech Chochmah that I think is worthy of reflecting on for a few moments. And he says, think of it from Yaakov's perspective. This doesn't make any sense. Why are the Jewish people leaving the Holy Land of Israel, going back to the generation of his parents and the generation of his grandparents? There was only one time where there was a clear directive to a patriarch and matriarch to go to a land. Do you know when that one time was? A divine directive. That was when God told Abraham to go to the holy land of Canaan, what we think of as the land of Israel. That makes sense. Let Abraham establish himself in this holy spiritual place and build a family there for generations. How does it make any sense for Yaakov to leave that holy land? Where is this going? What is the end game? And he's going to move his whole family to the land of Egypt? How can you even wrap your mind around it? Remember also Yaakov's life, unlike that of any of the other patriarchs, was an absolute roller coaster. Terrors, Esav and Lavan, and these years with Yosef were very complicated. On a certain level, we have the Rashi at the beginning of Parshas Vayigash, Bikesh Yaakov Leshev B'Shalva. Before the story of Yosef, Yaakov wanted to finally sit and in tranquility, sit in a state of tranquility. And people wonder what that medrash really means. Does it mean that Yaakov didn't want challenges in life? Does it mean that Yaakov wasn't ambitious? And presumably that's not the case. Presumably what it means is Yaakov was ready to serve God in a meaningful way without all the chaos. He had served God with so much chaos. Now let's just be calm. I'm in Israel. I'm with, thank God, a large family ready to build the future generations of God's chosen nation in God's chosen land. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yaakov, leave Israel to go to Mitzrayim, to go to Egypt. And the Meshech Chochmah says that Hashem says to Yaakov, I'm going to be with you, I'm going to take you down, ultimately I'll bring your people up, and by extension that will mean you as well. And Yosef will cover your eyes. What it means, the covering of the eyes, is don't worry about understanding it. It won't make sense to you. Don't spend too much time trying to understand how it all works out. You won't get it. Just know that there's a plan, and know that I'm not forsaking you and your family and your people, because I'm ultimately going to take you all back out. Allow Yosef to cover your eyes. Don't think too hard about it. And that's a very interesting shot. We, of course, know that in future times, this message is something, whether it be on the personal scale, whether it be on the national scale. This message is something that we find ourselves thinking about, hearing about, sharing with others many, many times and many, many ways. Do you understand the Holocaust? Of course we don't understand the Holocaust. How many other... Do you understand the story of Tach V'Tat? Do we understand the Spanish Inquisition? How many different times do we understand anti-Semitism? How many different times and how many different places on this world have the Jewish people not understood what's going on. And obviously, we don't like not understanding. That's not pleasant to not understand. But there is somewhat of a consolation in the fact that the great Yaakov, whose life was all about dealing with challenge, his life was about dealing with challenge more than the other figures from these generations. Hashem tells him, you're not going to get it. Don't try too hard to figure it out. This video is probably going out on Friday, Asar B'Teves. Each of the communal fast days, with the exception of Tanis Esther, Yom Kippur is a different story, but the general fast days, Asar B'Teves, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, Tzom Gedalia, each of these fast days are focusing on a significant moment in the history of Klal Yisrael in which great tragedy came, great difficulty came on a national scale. And the goal of such days is to reflect and tell ourselves that when problems happen on a national scale, not on a personal scale is a different story, but when problems happen on a national scale, the message is for all of us as a nation to try to figure out how we can do better. And that we shouldn't have such problems in our times. But to even remember that problems occurred on this date in an earlier time, that the wheels were turned in motion to ultimately lead to destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, not on this date, but there were events on this date that led to destruction. And to realize that we as a people always need to figure out how we can be doing better. But as we reflect on these calamities, whether it be in the times of the temple, whether it be in later times, to remind ourselves that behind all of it is Hashem orchestrating all of the events. And obviously, it's incumbent upon us to bring great merit to ourselves and to our people, and we have to do ours. But we also have to believe that there is a plan, and we'll never understand it. But just even knowing that the great Yaakov Avinu himself was told, you don't understand why you're going down to Egypt, but just allow Yosef to cover your eyes and be all right with the fact that you don't understand. That in and of itself is a powerful lesson for all of us, hopefully in times of celebration, but even in times of mourning. Have a good Shabbos.